I inherited everything from my ex-husband's mother after caring for her, but now he and his mistress are threatening legal action. Hi everyone, I'm Gigi, 27, and I have a 7-year-old daughter named Naomi. I was married to my ex-husband, Jack, 30, for nearly 8 years. When I was 2 months pregnant with our second child, I discovered that Jack was cheating on me with his coworker, Suzanne, 28. I stumbled upon their text messages on his phone, and when I confronted him in tears, he revealed that Suzanne was also pregnant with his child. I was so shocked that I almost fainted. Our marriage quickly unraveled amidst constant fighting. Despite my ex-mother-in-law coming to care for me during this difficult time, the stress was overwhelming, and I ultimately miscarried. When Jack learned of our loss, he didn't hesitate. Instead of comforting me, he left to be with Suzanne, blaming me for the miscarriage. I was devastated and cried for days. Thankfully, my ex-mother-in-law stayed by my side and looked after Naomi while I grieved. The divorce was contentious, with Jack initially refusing to pay child support until the court intervened. He made it clear he wanted nothing to do with me or Naomi, giving me full custody, which broke my heart for my daughter. Jack only ever paid child support and never tried to visit or connect with Naomi. Eventually, I learned that Suzanne had given birth to Jack's son, and they've been together ever since. Throughout this, my parents and my ex-mother-in-law were my constant support. They had been close friends for years, which is how Jack and I first met. When Jack's mother found out about his infidelity, she was furious with him and showed unwavering support for me. She and Jack had many fights over his affair, and she vowed never to speak to him again. Even after he left me, she warned him that she wanted nothing to do with Suzanne or their child. True to her word, she cut him off until her death, refusing to visit him even when he begged her. Suzanne was envious of my relationship with my ex-mother-in-law, as she was never truly considered family. When Jack's mother supported me, she faced backlash from her own family, who urged her to forgive Jack, especially after losing his father. Despite their pressure, she steadfastly refused to forgive him and always prioritized our relationship. When Suzanne gave birth, Jack's relatives rallied around him, ignoring the pain he had caused me. The tension escalated to the point where Jack's family excluded his mother from events just to include him and Suzanne. My ex-mother-in-law, however, made it clear she would not attend if Jack and Suzanne were there. I felt sorry for her, but she assured me that I was like her own child, and she didn't mind being excluded. I'm incredibly grateful for my ex-mother-in-law's love and support. It's a rare gift. Unfortunately, her health declined, and she lost the ability to walk. I invited her to move in with me permanently, promising to care for her with the help of a live-in nanny during the day. While I took on the evenings, I dedicated countless hours to her care, and I genuinely didn't mind. Naomi was delighted to have her grandmother living with us. During her time with us, my ex-mother-in-law shared something significant. She had changed her will after discovering Jack's infidelity. Initially, she intended for him to inherit everything, but now the house and her life insurance were for Naomi, with a large portion of her money and family heirlooms designated for me. This gesture was one of honor and trust. She wanted me to protect these possessions and eventually pass them down to Naomi, creating a lasting connection to her family. Jack would inherit her car and his father's entire art collection, but until Naomi turned 18, the money would be held in trust. If I were to pass away, my parents would manage it. As she revealed this, a mix of shock, gratitude, and sadness washed over me. It filled me with appreciation that she recognized our struggles and wanted to secure Naomi's future. I assured her multiple times that she could change her will to include Suzanne and their child if she wished. I emphasized that I held no grudge against them, but she insisted that I was still her son's wife in her eyes, regardless of our divorce. She believed Naomi was the rightful inheritor of her home and legacy, a sentiment I respected. Throughout her stay, Jack never reached out to ask about his mother's health. Despite our past, I would have welcomed his concern, but he never bothered. One day, when my ex-mother-in-law had trouble breathing, I rushed her to the hospital, terrified for her safety. While my dad watched Naomi, my mom and I spent the night praying for her recovery. Fortunately, she pulled through, and we brought her home. After her health scare, I didn't want her to pass away without Jack at least making amends. I called him, pleading for him to visit, explaining that her doctor had warned us about her condition and that time might be running out. Instead of showing concern, Jack argued about how his mother never built a relationship with Suzanne. I begged him to set aside his pride for the sake of his mother, but he insisted he was too busy. It was heartbreaking to see his indifference during such a critical time. Despite his reluctance, I persisted, urging him to reconsider. Eventually, he agreed to a brief visit. When he arrived, I was shocked to see Suzanne with him. Although I wasn't thrilled about her presence in my home, I kept quiet for my ex-mother-in-law's sake. The tension was palpable as Jack and his mother exchanged awkward silences and forced pleasantries. Jack's demeanor remained unchanged during his visit. Even as he faced his frail mother, he spoke in a detached manner, steering clear of any heartfelt conversation. It was clear that his presence was more of a box to check off than a genuine attempt to reconnect with her. Although I felt disheartened by their lack of emotional connection, I found some comfort in the fact that he had at least followed through on his promise to visit. When my ex-mother-in-law noticed that Jack had brought Suzanne and their child along, she began to protest. I quickly reassured her, insisting that it was fine and that I didn't mind who Jack chose to bring, as long as he had come to support her. With her health rapidly declining, she was bedridden and had little choice in the matter. True to my word, I stayed quiet, even when Suzanne started being overly nice to her. When my ex-mother-in-law expressed her discomfort around Darren, Suzanne reminded her that he was her grandchild too. Needing a moment, I stepped out of the room to give them some privacy and check on my daughter, who seemed sad and hurt at seeing her father. Jack hadn't even acknowledged her presence. While in the kitchen, I noticed Suzanne heading into our backyard to make a phone call. Through the open window, I could hear her laughter as she spoke about how she felt forced to visit Jack's mother. She casually mentioned how Jack had told her that his mother would be leaving him everything, so they had to make this visit one last time. To my dismay, she expressed excitement about moving into the house and changing everything, remarking on how my ex-mother-in-law had no taste. I was taken aback by her cruelty as she outlined plans to remove any trace of me and my daughter once Jack took ownership of the house. As she shared her vision of repainting the walls and altering the landscape, I felt disbelief and anger at her utter disregard for the home's history. In that moment, I realized that Suzanne's interest in my ex-mother-in-law was anything but genuine. Her motives were solely about securing her inheritance. This revelation shattered my heart, making it clear that she cared more for potential wealth than for the well-being of my ex-mother-in-law in her final days. Despite knowing the truth about Suzanne's intentions, I chose to keep it to myself, not wanting to burden my ex-mother-in-law further. Jack remained oblivious to the fact that his mother had altered her will after his infidelity. He assumed he would inherit everything, which he intended to pass on to his child with Suzanne. I felt no obligation to inform him of the changes, especially since he had shown little regard for Naomi. As Jack and Suzanne continued their visit, I was caught in a bittersweet situation. On one hand, I was losing my beloved ex-mother-in-law. On the other, I couldn't wait to see Jack's reaction when he learned about the updated will. It filled me with sadness, knowing that I would soon say goodbye to someone who had meant so much to me. I understood that she made her decision thoughtfully, wanting to ensure Naomi felt loved and cherished, even in her absence. My ex-mother-in-law had always said she couldn't rest until her son and Suzanne faced the consequences of their actions, having experienced a similar betrayal in her own childhood. As her health continued to decline, Jack didn't bother to visit her again, nor did any of her relatives. Tragically, she passed away last week. In the aftermath of her death, I took it upon myself to organize her funeral. Despite the lack of support from her relatives, I wanted to give her a dignified farewell. My parents and I handled all the arrangements, from selecting a beautiful casket to finding a serene venue. Suzanne and Jack didn't even attend the funeral, although some of their relatives did, showing little genuine concern. When her lawyer eventually reached out about her will, I was flooded with emotions. Tears filled my eyes as I learned that she had left everything to me, just as we had discussed. The mix of joy and sorrow enveloped me as I mourned the loss of a cherished person while feeling grateful that I could finally provide for my daughter. Amidst these conflicting feelings, there was a sudden knock at the door. When I opened it, I found Suzanne, Jack, Darren, and a few other relatives standing there with grim expressions. Jack wasted no time in demanding an explanation for the will. His accusing tone cut through the tension in the room. "Why did you get everything my mother had? A house, money, heirlooms. Why do you end up with it all?" he shouted, his anger palpable. I struggled to remain calm as I explained that my ex-mother-in-law had made her decision carefully. He accused me of manipulating her while she was bedridden, but I pointed out that the will had been updated long before her health began to decline. Suzanne chimed in, resentment evident in her voice as she questioned why I and my daughter deserved anything when she and her son were family too. I scoffed at her and revealed what I had overheard her saying on the phone. Her eyes widened in shock, and Jack looked at her in disbelief as the reality of her intentions became clear. Caught off guard, Suzanne attempted to deny my claims, accusing me of fabricating stories to create division. I firmly reminded them that it was Suzanne who had cheated with Jack while he was still married to me, effectively dividing the family in the first place. The argument escalated, with Jack's relatives expressing their disappointment over not receiving anything from my ex-mother-in-law. They insisted that, as blood relatives, they deserved a share of her inheritance. The room erupted into demands for me to sell the property and split the proceeds 8 ways. I was shocked by their callousness and sense of entitlement, as they sought what they had no right to. I firmly told them that I was the only one who had cared for my ex-mother-in-law during her final days while none of them had bothered to visit her. They had no right to storm into my house and demand anything belonging to her. The room was filled with raised voices as they continued to question the fairness of the will. Jack argued that it was his childhood home and he deserved to live there with Suzanne and their child. He even threatened to sue me and contest the will if I didn't hand over the house. I laughed at his audacity, surprising him with my reaction. I reminded him that he had been a neglectful son, only visiting once when I pleaded with him to check on her. I told him he could waste his money trying to sue me. Her lawyer had already confirmed that the will was ironclad and there was nothing he could do. Naomi was her grandchild, and I was her daughter-in-law who loved and cared for her, so it was only right that everything was left to us. That's when Suzanne began to plead, urging me to think about their son, Darren, and how he deserved a good life like Naomi. I agreed with her sentiment but pointed out that she never seemed to care about my daughter, Naomi, and how Jack had treated her all these years. I made it clear that she could beg all she wanted, but I would never give her or her child anything. I asked them politely but firmly to leave my home. I reminded them they could review the will with her lawyer again if they wanted, but I was done discussing it. I knew they wouldn't have come to me so angrily if they had any real claim. I shut the door in their faces, feeling a sense of relief for standing my ground and honoring my ex-mother-in-law's wishes. Since then, Jack has bombarded me with calls and messages, expressing his hatred for me and insisting that if I had any decency, I would hand over everything that he believed rightfully belonged to his family, not to me and Naomi. So, Reddit, am I the villain for refusing to meet my ex-husband's family's demands? Update 1, I expected just a few comments, but wow. Thank you all for listening and offering your suggestions. For those upset that I didn't ask my ex-mother-in-law to include Jack's new child and Suzanne, I did try, but it was ultimately her decision. I can't change that now. You can call me selfish, but I refuse to give up any part of the inheritance. I will prioritize myself and my daughter. I resent Jack and Suzanne for breaking my heart. Their affair contributed to my miscarriage. When I was at my lowest, Jack chose to leave me for her. My ex-mother-in-law deliberately decided not to include the child from the affair and Suzanne in her will. She had ample time to update it if she wanted to, but she didn't. I do feel for the child, but it's not my responsibility. For context, my ex-mother-in-law's childhood was ruined because her father prioritized his affair children. That's likely why she wanted nothing to do with Jack. As a favored child, Jack knew this but still betrayed her. Despite this, my ex-mother-in-law left him his father's entire art collection, which will fetch him thousands, so he can take care of Suzanne and their child. The people criticizing me wouldn't be half as civil if they were in my shoes, so I won't back down. Naomi is Jack's child too, yet he's only concerned about his child with Suzanne. He never bothered to be a good father to Naomi, so he doesn't deserve anything from us after all he's put us through. Update 2, the tension between Jack and Suzanne has only grown. Their incessant demands and accusations have strained my peace. Yesterday, Suzanne called me unexpectedly. I didn't even have her number saved, so I answered without knowing who it was. Right away, her tone was hostile. She accused me of being a greedy gold digger who stole everything from them. She even said she was glad Jack left me after the miscarriage because I didn't deserve to be with him. I was caught off guard by her aggression, especially since I was in the middle of work. I calmly explained that my ex-mother-in-law had made her own decision, and I wasn't responsible for it. Suzanne wasn't interested in hearing me out. She continued to insult my integrity, and I firmly reminded her that she never had a relationship with my ex-mother-in-law while she was alive, so she had no right to demand anything from her. Suzanne then threatened me and my child, saying if I didn't give Jack a share of my inheritance, she would find a way to tell Naomi the truth about me. That crossed a line. I told her that involving my child was unacceptable, and if she came near her, I would have her arrested. I had enough evidence from her previous messages to get a restraining order easily. I also reminded her that I could inform her boss about her threats, which seemed to silence her. I ended the call and immediately called Jack to inform him of what Suzanne had said and warned him that I would involve the police if this continued. He seemed shocked that Suzanne had threatened Naomi and started to apologize on her behalf, but I cut him off. I told him I owed him nothing and would take what his mother left for me. He could cry all he wanted. It belonged to me, and he couldn't do a thing about it. I warned him that the next time he or his wife contacted me or my child, there would be serious legal consequences. Since then, my phone has been surprisingly quiet. I stand by my words, if either of them ever dares to contact me again. Update 3. It's been 2 months since my last update. I've received hundreds of requests for more details, so here it goes. We have moved into my ex-mother-in-law's home. As we settle in, I can't help but wish she were still here. I miss her everywhere, in the rooms where we laughed, in the backyard where she enjoyed her evenings, and in the kitchen where we shared countless conversations. Her spirit lingers in every corner of this house that once echoed with her warmth. Each day is a mix of emotions, gratitude for the inheritance that secures Naomi's future and sorrow for the loss of the woman who meant so much to us. I try to find comfort in knowing that the house, once a sanctuary for my ex-mother-in-law, will continue to be a haven for Naomi. In these moments, I carry her spirit with me, grateful for the time we had together and determined to honor the legacy she left behind.